Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause. Coming to you, as I always do, from my little, you can see it, my nutshell of infinite space, right here in the wood of the holly in the land of law. And today I have a really special and extremely accomplished guest. He's a historian, he's a journalist, he is a think tanker, and a cultural list maker. And as I like to say, an abstract and brief chronicler of our times. He's written extensively about Israel, liberalism, and he most recently wrote this book, which I want to do a little deep dive into. It's called We Are Not One, A History of America's Fight Over Israel. And beyond that, he wrote The Cause, A History of Liberalism in the 20th Century. But just a few weeks ago, he wrote a very compelling op-ed piece in the New York Times that caught my attention about his reaction to the most recent production of the Arthur Miller classic, Death of a Salesman. Welcome, Eric Altman. How you doing?
Well, Liv.
Well, start with the Mets. I guess they're not doing so well. What happened?
No, start with the Mets, yeah, right. We have the worst billionaire in the world owning the Mets. I mean, he's got all the money in the world, and it just makes him worse and worse every year.
I can name a worse billionaire just in terms of his effect on the larger planet, but maybe it's the Mets billionaire. So the Wilpons are out of it. I don't even know who owns the Mets anymore, right?
Steve Cohen owns the Mets. I don't know if this is true of other teams. I've been a Mets fan since I was 7 years old. I guess it'll be 60 years next year. I could do that amount of math. And I feel like the Mets owners have always had particular contempt for their fans. Letting Tom Seaver go was one of the biggest crises of my adolescence or childhood. And then this year they just let Pete Alonso go, by far and away the most popular player on the team, homegrown. And for what? You know, the owner is a billionaire. A few $1 million makes no difference to them. They just don't care about their fans at all. I mean, it's so humiliating to be a Mets fan.
As a Dodger fan, we're not really yet the beneficiary of that relief pitcher because he's injured. But
he wanted to go. People want to go to the Dodgers. They want to win World Series. I get it, but Pete just went to the Orioles just because he didn't get a good enough offer from the Mets. I don't think the Mets could have gotten what's his face. But anyway, let's talk about whatever.
Let's talk about Death of a Salesman. You saw it? I didn't.
I haven't seen it. I'm seeing it on Sunday. I haven't seen this one.
Okay, so in your op-ed, which one were you? Which production?
2012. As I said in the op-ed, 2012.
Oh, okay. I don't know
with Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
The late Seymour Philip Hoffman.
A great actor. I can't imagine Nathan Lane in it, but I hear he's great.
I expect he'll be great. He's a very versatile actor, Nathan.
You know, as a young actor, I always wanted to play Biff. I always felt that part, he goes west. He was an athlete. I think he was unspokenly sort of the spirit of Arthur Miller in a way. I would have loved, like I said, to have seen Lee J. Cobb because that guy just chewed the scenery. He just had so much anger and fury.
He was an angry man.
Yes. And he had the history, the theatrical history coming from the group theater and Clifford Odets. I mean, he was just rooted in that world in a way that nobody is today.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about Arthur Miller and that play as you related to it, as its relationship to just Jewish life. Because as you say in the article, it's not really explicit in the play, but it feels like it's there nonetheless.
Well, I've been working on a book. I'm not sure I'm actually going to ever publish it. I have a contract for it. But I'm working on a book for a very long time about these people that I'm defining as non-Jewish Jews. A non-Jewish Jew, it's a phrase originated by a British Marxist historian named Isaac Deutscher. The original non-Jewish Jew is Baruch Spinoza. A non-Jewish Jew is someone who is twice alienated from the society in which they live. They're alienated from the society as a Jew, but they're also alienated from the Jewish community. And so they're alone. Spinoza was the most independent person in all of Europe because in those days you had to belong to a particular regime and not necessarily a country. And he had either you converted to Christianity or you were a Jew, unless you were a Muslim, and he was nothing, and nobody else was at the time. Anyway, the idea is that you're able to see things that other people are not able to see because they have these blinders that come from their loyalty to whatever regime they belong to. So Miller is really among the first of these in the United States because he represents this moment in the immediate aftermath of the discovery of the Holocaust where anti-Semitism was no longer okay, at least in public. and Jews all of a sudden had doors opening to them that had never been opened before. But they were not representative of Americans the way years later you could say they were. Like Woody Allen, Larry David, Philip Roth, they're Americans first and then Jews second. That wasn't the case in Arthur Miller. The interesting thing about the moment that Arthur Miller was writing, in my opinion, is that it's the first time you had Jews at the center of the discourse, but he wasn't ready to call them Jews. So there's like a progression. There's as I define it in this book, there's Death of a Salesman, where they're Jews, but no one says so. Then there's Saul Bellows, The Adventures of Augie March, where he says they're Jews, but they don't act particularly Jewish. And then you get to Philip Roth and Goodbye Columbus, 1959, where they're Jews, damn it, and if you don't like it, tough luck. And these not only are they Jews, but they're behaving in ways that anti-Semites say Jews behave sometimes, which is true because all people behave that way sometimes. There's just like a Jewish accent to it. So there's this progression of Jews sort of coming out of the closet as Jews. It begins with Death of a Salesman. Now, I'll say one more thing about this, which I wanted to say in the piece. They cut it, which is it's happening at a time where anti-Semitism is actually an issue because of the Holocaust. So in 1947, right before Death of a Salesman, you had 3 movies about anti-Semitism.
Gentleman's Agreement, I think.
Gentleman's Agreement, Crossfire, and another one. They were about anti-Semitism, not about Jews. So like Gentleman's Agreement, what's the great, the great quip about Gentleman's Agreement?
Well, it was Gregory Peck, and he goes undercover, as I recall.
No, but the great quip that's attributed to, I don't know, like Damon Runyon or something. It says, always be nice to a Jew because he might turn out to be a Gentile.
Well, that's an interesting thesis about sort of Jewish people.
And Miller wrote a book. Miller, before he wrote Death of a Salesman, wrote a book that was made into a movie just about 10 years ago called Focus. Exactly the same theme about a man who's misidentified as a Jew and it ruins his life, which preceded Gentleman's Agreement.
Hello, friends, countrymen, and subscribers. After a number of years doing this podcast, I finally have a promotional partner, and the company is called Cozy Earth, and they make all manner of bamboo bedding for your sleepy time needs. That includes pillowcases, duvets, sheets, and even pajamas. And I'm able to offer you a 21% discount on any and all purchases from Cozy Earth. All you have to do is type in the promo code REBEL to get that 21% discount. Now, I've been using these bamboo sheets from Cozy Earth for a couple of years now, and I can stand behind it because I sleep on it. So all you got to do is, like I said, type in the promo code REBEL, go to the Cozy Earth website, and you can get a 21% discount and support sound sleep while you support me. Dig it, Daddy-O. My favorite piece of Arthur Miller writing, oddly enough, is a movie, and that's The Misfits, which is, dead center Americana about cowboys.
I like The Misfits. Most people don't think it's a great movie, but I like it a lot. I really love Marilyn Monroe. I think she's a wonderful person. I love looking at her, and then it makes me sad, but she was such a good person. Do you know that Marilyn Monroe bought a subscription to Eye of Stones Weekly for every single member of Congress?
No.
She's amazing. She was really political. She's very intelligent. She had no education. She was impossible, but she certainly had a right to be impossible given her horrible background, how she was raised. But The Misfits is a painful thing to watch because that was the end for them and ultimately for her.
I was trying to think of if there's any Jewish sort of identity lingering in the movie, and maybe Eli Wallach, could very well have been a non-Jew Jew, the pilot. I definitely felt like he was different, than the other guys. But that's my favorite piece of Arthur Miller writing. But, I remember seeing The Price some years ago. I studied acting with Jack Garfine, who was close with Arthur Miller, and produced one of his plays, which, as I mentioned to you, I had an opportunity to audition for as a young actor. And he was in the room. It was The American Clock. Must have been one of his last.
I don't know that one.
Yeah.
But I've seen a few of his plays, and they're all, he doesn't have much of a sense of humor, but he writes plays that stay with you. The Bridge is a good play. Of course, All My Sons is something of a classic.
Yeah. Is that A View from the Bridge? I think it's.
Yeah, View from the Bridge.
Yeah, A View from the Bridge. Yeah, we talked about Death of a Salesman. We talked about Lee J. Cobb, who was, Johnny Friendly and just one of my favorite actors. Great chewer of scenery. But he's also in a movie that figures extremely prominently in your book about Israel and American Jews. And that, of course, is Otto Preminger's Exodus.
Yeah.
When I was thinking about it today, I thought, oh, he plays David Ben-Gurion. And then I looked at the IMDb this morning and I go, no, he wasn't. They didn't have a character. I guess he was just the leading political figure as part of independence that was invented.
Well, none of the people in that movie have their correct names. None of those people have real names. There are no actual people in that movie.
Yeah, but in my mind, it was like, oh, yeah, he played David Ben-Gurion. But when I revisited it, I realized he didn't. I want you to talk about how that movie, because I grew up, I'm of similar age. And
really? I look so much younger than you.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's amazing, God. But that movie, when I grew up as a kid, Israel was this gutty little underdog beating up on, all these enemies. And Exodus, as you rightly point out, is sort of expresses that so completely in the movie, but maybe it wasn't so true.
Maybe. There's an article today in the New York Times on the homepage as I speak at this moment that says, will Cuba repay the billions that it confiscated in the 1959 revolution from, the property that it took when Castro came to power?
Yeah.
Well, in 1950, after Israel expelled approximately 750,000 Arabs and then lied about it and convinced Americans and American Jews in particular that they had left of their own volition. 2 years later, in 1950, it passed a law where it confiscated all of their land. First, it expelled them, and then it expropriated all their land. Then it gave it to Jews. So, from the start, now, can anyone justify that from a moral point of view? Is that a light unto nations? Kicking people out, taking their land, giving it to your people with no compensation, and never allowing those people to come back to their country. That's something I learned writing the book. I began this book saying, I used to call myself a liberal Zionist, and I had sort of a deep attachment to Israel. I guess I still have an attachment to Israel, but I always blame the occupation as a kind of cancer in Israel that was destroying its democracy but it goes back to the very beginning. They expelled 7/8 of the Arabs there. They took their land. The ones who remained, about 150,000 remained in 1948, and they all lived under martial law. Did you know that?
No.
From 1948 to 1966, they had no rights at all. They were under military occupation. So if they wanted to go visit their cousin in another village, they needed permission from the army. If they were out after curfew, they could be shot, and that happened, more often than we have heard about here. And it's my view, we were taught, you and I, that Israel wanted peace with its neighbors, and they didn't want peace, and that's the problem. But it's my view is what Israel wants is to get rid of the Arabs from its own territory, now from the territory it occupies. It's doing just that in Lebanon, and there's another Nakba taking place on the West Bank as we speak. And after researching this book, and I'm a PhD historian, it seems to me Israel has always preferred land to peace. They take human life very seriously in Israel. Thousands of people will come to your funeral. Grieving parents are a thing that I'm sure everybody grieves when their children are killed. I don't mean to minimize that at all, but in Israel, it's like a national pastime. And yet, they are unwilling to take the risks that would be necessary to see if peace is possible. They prefer the current constant loss of life to the risks of checking out to see if they could have peace. And so, I used to be friends with Edward Said, the Palestinian intellectual, and he said that driving from the West Bank to Tel Aviv is like driving from Bangladesh to Southern California. I mean, Israel holds all the cards. So if you say neither side is ready for peace, well, that's certainly true today, but one side is in a position to take some risks and the other one has nothing to offer but the possibility of peace. So when I see what Israel has become today, and I'm slightly changing the subject, but What I see what Israel is doing today, I'm heartbroken. Speaking of movies, I took my daughter to see Godfather Part Two for the first time a few weeks ago, and when Michael puts his hands on Fredo's face and says, "You broke my heart, Fredo. I know it was you." I turned to my daughter and said, "That's just how I feel about Israel. It broke my heart." Okay, what you got? I'm sorry, that was a
No, that's a very
digression.
apt analogy, but it's interesting because as you describe it, starting with the Nakba in 1948, that we were just deceived that there was another narrative that really was not shared.
Right. We were told there were these radio broadcasts, and everyone believed it. That where the Arab nation said, "Just come on over for a few minutes, and we'll get rid of. We'll send these Jews into the sea, and then you can go back and live a nice life in your old, with your old olive groves." There's no evidence anywhere for any radio broadcast. The only way we can't say there were none because it's impossible to prove a negative, but there's no evidence for them. So, and yet this story, people testified about it in Congress. It's in textbooks. Someone brought it up to me the other day, and I said, actually, that was made up. So the Israelis were brilliant at telling the story they wanted to tell and ignoring the reality. I don't know how they did it really, because, I mean, if you ask me my opinion, you can't know the answer. It's possible to know. My opinion is that the Jews in Israel felt that the rest of the world had lost whatever moral authority it had. And the only thing that mattered now was to build a state that could protect Jews. Nothing else mattered. There was no other morality. So if you had to kill people who didn't deserve to be killed, you had to throw people out of their homes, you had to do all these things that are unjustifiable if you were doing them to a neighbor or someone you knew, that was fine. Because the world had no right to tell Israel anything at all. Elie Wiesel said this out loud. He said, "We won't be lectured by these people who allowed the Holocaust to take place." And I think they still feel that way. I mean, I think, Israel has killed 80 Gazans for every Jew that was killed on October 7th. 80.
Right. I call it a thousand teeth for a tooth.
Okay, that's another way to put it. So how do you justify it? It's impossible to justify it unless you say these people just don't matter. Their lives are worthless because what matters is protecting Jews.
Do you think that's true of all the various governments, starting from like the Ben Gurion and all the way to, the current guy, Netanyahu? Is this just something that's really not just specific to Netanyahu, or he's just more maybe honest about it?
Well, I think he's worse, but I think it's true of all the governments. Yeah. If you look at the brief moments where there were negotiations where it looked like peace was possible, it's through Rabin, and then after that with what's his name, guy who was indicted. Anyway, it was never clear that they had the country with them. Rabin was kind of special because he had been a warrior and he wanted to break bones during the Intifada. And so his conversion narrative was effective. Although, again, even after Camp David, by the way, I was on the White House grounds for Camp David. I was there. It was incredibly moving. And I thought to myself, I don't see how this is possible. And it turned out it wasn't possible because I didn't think that any Israeli government could offer the Palestinians anything that the Palestinians could actually accept. And it turns out I was right because they didn't make much of an offer after that. And look at Camp David. In the Camp David agreements, there's no mention of a Palestinian state. They never granted that.
Right.
Yeah, as I said, the Israelis have held all the cards the entire time. I mean, the Palestinians have been terrible at politics, and I'm very critical of them. One reason I feel the book is not as prominent as I would have liked, given how hard I worked on it and how proud I am of it, is that it didn't take a line that either the Palestinian side or the Israeli side would have liked. Like the Palestinian back in 1948, they made a terrible mistake in not cooperating with the UN. Right. When the UN was dividing up Israel. And they've made a lot of mistakes since. But, they had a point that the whole game was fixed, that Israel, the Jews at the time of 1948, were approximately a third of the population. And they got 2/3 of the land given to them by the UN and all of its warm water ports. So Palestine that was being offered to the Palestinians was, it's kind of like one of those South African homelands.
Or like the Lakota people in the Americas, the Indian,
Yeah. Well, that's the analogy I use when I discuss Exodus. That the Arabs are the Indians in Exodus, and so there's a notable one or two of them, but basically they're subhuman. In the movie, they're actually Nazis. In the book, they're not Nazis. The book is terrible too, but at least they're not Nazis.
Well, let me ask you this: do you think every people deserves its own state, or alternatively, every people deserves equal rights under the law in the state they live in, because I feel like that's sort of
Well, it's ridiculous to say every people deserves their own state.
right.
The world can't be set up that way. So no, that's an easy question.
Right.
Should all people be treated equally wherever they live? Absolutely. Sure. Why not? People are people.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with this sort of liberal idea about the civil rights. I've written about it myself in screenplays. And, for most of my life, because I lived in the info bubble that I grew up in, I could sort of be, feel like Israel was in alignment basically with my larger worldview. But that's shattered. It's completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes I'm asked to lead the Passover, the Seder. And I was talking about this liberation story that we celebrate, which essentially is a nonviolent exercise. But I happened to mention, I said, but now, folks, I said, we're the pharaohs. As you just echoing what you said, I said, it feels like the Jews have the hammer. They have all the power. So it's up to us, the powerful, not the powerless, to sort of reach out and make a move.
Yeah, well, it's not that simple, but okay. I mean, I don't disagree, but it's also not that simple.
Well,
also, when you say us, you're not an Israeli.
No, I'm not. I'm Jewish.
You're
I'm
an
American.
Jew. So
I identify as an American. I don't identify as an Israeli.
There is no us in this case. You're not them. They're different. Different country. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't identify as an Israeli at all. I mean, I would be the first to say I identify.
Right. So I just want to make that point that American Jews have historically, since 1967, certainly, their primary identity has been as Zionists. Most Jews never go to synagogue. About half go twice a year. Only 10% actually go every Saturday. But until recently, most of them would have said, I'm Zionist. I care about Israel. I support Israel. It's a lot less true today than it was just a few years ago. So they would talk about Israel as we, but it's not we. They have a completely different experience of growing up and living in life. So that's why it's one of the reasons my book is called We Are Not One. We are not one. They're a different country.
But alternatively, I'm a 2-person-a-year synagogue guy for the benefit of my mom. On every bima, there's the Israeli flag and the American flag. And so you were raised to feel psychically that it was one, even though,
Yeah, well, you and I were, but we're old men, and the next generation doesn't feel that way.
Have this thought too, is that they made peace, an uneasy one, with the Egyptians, who were truly an existential threat. And that's held over the decades, but they just are not interested with.
Well, the Egyptian peace is a bribe from the United States. Egypt is the second greatest receiver of U.S. foreign aid, and that's really because it's really aid going to Israel. It's to keep that particular peace so that Israel is never threatened by the Egyptians. Jimmy Carter did more for Israeli security than any other president has, and he was reviled for it by American Jewish leaders.
He almost has a heroic sort of light cast on him. But I have a very right-wing conservative stepfather, and to him, Jimmy Carter is the devil. I never really. He's got that Fox News IV in his forearm every day, but Jimmy Carter might as well be like the worst person that ever lived. And we're seeing, what Barack Obama accomplished in Iran, or with Iran. That was a diplomatic achievement also, and it's torn asunder.
Mm-hmm.
Where does criticism of Israel and an anti-Semitism begin?
I don't know if you saw this in my bio. I recently co-founded a Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism Research, because I think that anti-Semitism is misunderstood in this country purposely, not by the people who misunderstand it, but by the organizations that seek to undermine legitimate criticism of Israel by treating it as anti-Semitic. So there's an awful lot of good reasons. I mean, you've heard them from me for criticizing Israel that have nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And so I'm interested in providing, it's not me personally, we have people who really know what they're doing, but in providing evidence of what is genuine anti-Semitism and what is just about Israel. Look, there are a lot of people who hate Israel for good reason, support the Palestinians. Then there are some people who are in that camp, but also use anti-Semitic language and sound anti-Semitic. And some of those people are anti-Semitic. And some of them are not. Some of them just don't know that what they're saying sounds like anti-Semitism. So that's very hard to parse out in any individual. On the right, but those people, with very few exceptions, are not violent towards Jews. They might yell at them as they're going into a Hillel meeting or a synagogue. It's unpleasant. They might be jerks. They might be annoying, but they don't shoot up synagogues the way that the right does on occasion.
Right.
Virtually all of the violent anti-Semitism in this country is part of the white Christian nationalist movement that goes around saying Jews will not replace us and doesn't see Jews as legitimate Americans the way Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson talk about them. So when people say that anti-Semitism is exploding on the right and left, they're two very, very different phenomena. One is physically threatening the Jews, one is not. And one is, much of it would fall away if Israel wouldn't be inspiring it. The great irony, another sad thing to say about Israel, is it was founded as a refuge for Jews who were threatened all over the world, and now it's creating a threat to Jews all over the world.
My mom was born in Germany and was a baby refugee. I wouldn't call her a survivor because she was able to get out with her family intact, unscathed. And she gives money to an organization, and I often accompany her to the dinners. And you mentioned it in your book, stand with us against anti-Semitism. And I thought to myself, I go, half the people here make the case for anti-Semitism, but that's another story. But it's an extremely, the dinner that I have gone to at least 3 times is, in a palatial, wealthy estate. And I always feel a little uncomfortable there. Like, is this part of a larger, how legitimate is this? Or is this really just, a propaganda arm? I'm not sure.
Stand with us as a propaganda arm, to answer your question.
Do you think they do any good work?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but not to my knowledge. They're the kind of people who smear critics of Israel as anti-Semitic,
Right.
Period.
It's a very broad brush. I do not feel comfortable there, but, I do it for my mother.
Who am I to judge? What do you do for your mother?
Yeah, well, I go and I eat the food and I listen. I feel like it's important to hear what I can hear, but I don't hear a word about 1,000 teeth for a tooth. I don't hear anything about restorative justice. I don't hear anything other than that this sort of persistent race to victimhood, which is, of course, founded in the Holocaust. So I do it for my mom and the food.
I bet you the food's not worth it.
It's not that great. It's usually like kind of Persian and, but I go, and it's in a house that is, I don't know which previous movie star owned it, but it's huge. I mean, it's just like huge. So, they're very busy, I guess, with the legal arm of lawsuits and challenging stuff that they hear about on the college campuses. And you're there on a college campus, Brooklyn College. What are you seeing?
The college campuses are mostly pro-Palestinian. And because of Students for Justice in Palestine and to a lesser degree, Jewish Voice for Peace, they're very disruptive. One thing I really care about is defending universities in this country. Incredibly important, valuable, and fragile. And so I don't support anyone who seeks to undermine them. I didn't support the protesters who took over Hamilton Hall at Columbia or the hall at CCNY. I'm fine with them being expelled. Both places, they went way overboard with the cops. They panicked. And I was actually shut down at my own school when I was asked to speak about Israel shortly after October 7th by Students for Justice in Palestine. And I wish that people who came to universities would treat them as the fragile institutions that they are. But I don't mind that Jewish students come to college and hear things about Israel that they never heard before, and they're shocked, and they makes them feel bad a little bit. You're supposed to come to college to learn things you didn't know and to be challenged. I've never treated my classroom like a safe space. I treat it like a brave space. I tell people, how do you know what you know? It's actually the one thing I try and teach them is how do you know what you know? What is your source? How have you tested out that particular truth you seem to believe in? I mean, the protests are basically gone. The Trump administration's campaign of weaponizing anti-Semitism in order to destroy liberal education in this country and undermine democracy has so far been very effective. The colleges, they could have united to fight it, and they didn't. They cut deals to only pay a few hundred million rather than or a few tens of millions of dollars in ransom to Trump rather than getting together and saying, no, Pascaron. And it's a terrible situation. But, I live a few blocks from Columbia, and I never felt the slightest threat. People would write to me from Israel send emails saying, oh, it must be terrible where you are. You're so close to Columbia. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's the bagel place is a few blocks away. And
sometimes Barney Greengrass? Is that Barney Greengrass?
No. It's this famous bagel place right near Columbia. Barney Greengrass is.
Oh, that's farther down.
In the other direction. But sometimes the kids would come in keffiyehs, these white bread kids in keffiyehs. It would be funny, but that was it. That was all the threat that I felt as these, freshman girls in keffiyehs.
Well, it's. I went to Berkeley, UC Berkeley, so
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you've heard of it. Yeah, because you went to Stanford or graduate or PhD there or whatever.
I would have heard of it anyway.
Yeah, you've heard of it anyway. Erwin Chemerinsky is supposed to do one with me. I don't know when, but he just wrote his last op-ed was in the New York Times. I don't know, a couple of days ago. I forget now. But when I went to Berkeley, it was the free speech movement. But I'm not that old, so that preceded me by about 10 years. But that was partly why I went there, because I wanted the action. I grew up in this sort of suburban sameness of the San Fernando Valley, and I wanted to be where shit was happening, like I wanted to be stimulated. I wanted action, all kinds of action, actually. And so I went to Berkeley, but I never felt, like the Palestinian thing was even an issue, well, at least in the mid 70s. It was below.
You had to go looking for it. If you wanted it, you had to go look.
Right. It wasn't, there weren't a lot of tables in the quad with literature against. Maybe there was, but I didn't notice it. I was doing plays in the drama department, and I guess I was kind of brainwashed. Let me ask you this. I hope for some hopefulness, because what we're talking about is not hope.
You're not getting any from me, boy. I'm not in the hope business.
No, you're not in the hope business, but we did see an election in Hungary, and we did see an election in New York.
Yeah, actually, Mondani, I think he goes a little too far on Israel, and I think he's fanatical about Israel in such a way that is not helpful. But he's a wonderful politician, and he's a great symbol of the city, and he's done a really wonderful job. He's very good on the issue of anti-Semitism. He put out a whole bunch of statements when he was running in Yiddish, saying, "I'm going to protect you," to the Hasidim. He really cares about anti-Semitism. He just defines it in a way that the Jewish leaders don't like, because they don't want any protests against Israel. But he's wonderfully inclusive, and he's optimistic, and he's likable, and he's very smart. I didn't support him at first. I voted for him against Cuomo, but we have ranked voting in New York City, and I put him number 5 because he had no experience. He never had a staff larger than like 6 people, and he was going to be mayor of the city. But he seems to know what he doesn't know, which is, I think, the most important thing in someone who's running a big bureaucracy like New York City government.
Yeah, well, it was interesting to me because, typically mayoralities, when you're running for mayor, it's about results. It's potholes and schools and all this stuff. But it became an international referendum in New York. But New York's got more Jewish people than anyone. But actually, from what I understand, he got a lot of Jewish votes. He did quite well.
He got a third of the Jewish,
right?
Which is a lot. Yeah,
yeah, that's a lot. And
he won the Upper West Side.
Yeah, that's where I used to live, 70th in Amsterdam. That was my haunt. Well, and then the thing in Hungary. So, I mean, is there perhaps a sea change that maybe will arrive, in November, and maybe beyond that?
Is there perhaps a sea change that will arrive?
Yeah, well,
Yes,
because you write about liberalism.
yes,
That's your whole
yes,
thing.
yes, perhaps.
Yes.
I'm a historian. I'm not a futurist.
Okay, but we draw lessons from the past to help understand the near future.
If we have honest elections in November, then the Democrats will do very well and take the House, possibly the Senate, if we have honest elections. If they nominate somebody who doesn't have any particular problems for people, Democrats could win the presidency. Although the whole issue of Israel could make it impossible for them to do that because the party is so divided on Israel. And then after that, it's going to suck because the 2030 census is going to destroy the Democratic base numerically. It's terrifying what the political map, the electoral college map, and the House and Senate map will look like after 2030.
Is that because you think the counting is going to be false, or because
No, it's because the West is growing and the East and the blue cities are losing population. So an honest counting will kill the Democratic Party. With the current population, we haven't had a census, but with the current population, as of today, if a Democrat wins what Biden won, they would lose. In other words, they win the states that Biden won and lose the states that Biden lost. The loser would have won that election, according to current population now, and those trends are just growing. So I'm very pessimistic about the long-term future of this country, particularly since the Republican Party has given up entirely on democracy and also common sense. But in this case, we're talking about democracy.
so you don't have much faith in this larger liberal project going forward, that maybe the pendulum might swing in a better direction?
I have faith that the future is unwritten and that the world is unpredictable. That's where my faith derives from.
The uncertainty principle
Yes.
of Eric Alterman. Well, Eric, we could go on and talk forever, but I feel like I've covered just about everything I want to. I really did enjoy the book, about Israel's uneasy relationship. One of the things, it hits me now, is I identify as this assimilated American Jew, played football and baseball, and I surf, and I just have identified my whole life. My father was in the Marine Corps, Jewish, so much of my life was to kind of prove that I didn't fulfill some of those more wimpy stereotypes associated, with being Jewish. I feel like that's like a theme that I didn't even understand when I was trying to make baseball teams and football teams. And when I look back at it, sometimes through the lens of, you made me think about it after thinking about Death of a Salesman again, I go, that's part of one of the main themes of my life.
Okay. Good for us to look.
I don't know if you feel that or have felt that, or if that resonated for you.
Well, I never have. Anti-Semitism has never been an issue in my life, ever.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's because I've grown up in a northeastern bubble where Jews have been a majority in the neighborhoods I've lived in, mostly. So, I've always been incredibly comfortable both as an American and as a Jew. But I say, unlike most people I know, I'm a Jew first and an American second. And most Jews I know are Americans first and Jews second. Like, I'm much more emotionally upset about Israel than I am about the destruction of the United States of America, which is taking place simultaneously. I'm annoyed every minute of it, but emotionally, Israel sort of tugs on my heart in a way America doesn't. I guess I'm glad to be 66 years old. I'm sorry for my daughter. But I've always been a rather pessimistic person, and now I have better reasons than I've had in the past.
On that downward note, I want to see if I can elevate, at least for myself. I don't know. Am I a pessimist? I don't know. I'm looking for, some straws to pull, and maybe there's a hopeful future. I'll say this: being Jewish, when I look at some of these Hasidic and Orthodox neighborhoods that are adjacent to mine or nearby, I don't feel any connection to those people. They might as well be.
I do, because I'm a historian. I mean, I don't have anything in common with them particularly, but I like to see the past in front of me. Again, I live on the Upper West Side. It's the Upper West Side of Manhattan and maybe Park Slope in Brooklyn. In my view, it's the best time and place ever to be Jewish. I mean, we're incredibly comfortable. We're incredibly safe. I actually study Judaism a lot. I'm going to Torah study tonight, and it's a perfectly normal thing to do around here. People, on Saturday morning, the Broadway and West End Avenue and Riverside Drive are filled with people walking to shul. It's very comforting, I find, and the Hasidim are part of that. So as long as they're not infringing on my life, I'm cool with that. They're not like Jerry Falwell trying to shut me down.
Well, I'm friendly. I did a show with Peter Beinart, and who's also prominent in your book on numerous occasions, and he's managed to do the same. So,
yeah, Peter is an observant Jew, and I'm not. I'm a scholar of Judaism. Peter, you can't talk to him on Saturdays. He's I don't know how he gets done what he gets done, because he takes that whole day off. I work every day, and I don't get as much done.
Yeah, he's incredibly prolific. But most of the people that I know that are seriously observant or conservative are in lockstep with the Likud, Netanyahu, Israeli project. People that I've met are exceedingly conservative on that level.
Well, what can I tell you?
You're not responsible. Eric, thank you for your time and your scholarship and your insight. And to the folks out there, thanks for joining. You can subscribe to my vibe. Till next time, folks, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean namashaloha. See ya.